Welcome to the Ricecast. I'm your host, Dan Pigsley. With me, as always, is my friend and yours, Pastor Willie Rice. Pastor, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Holy Week, so this is the week for us. I mean, such a special time.
It's a great time. So we did our podcast last week. It was a great time where we were able to kind of walk through Jesus entering into Jerusalem.
Palm Sunday. It was a great weekend here at Calvary.
It was, yep.
It was fantastic. Had prayer times across campuses, and it just begins the week, and so here we are. This is the week, Easter coming, and as I said, such a very, very special week.
It is, and so we left off on the podcast last week where Jesus was entering into Jerusalem, and now I would love to get to kind of the beginning of the end, right before the crucifixion. So as he's spending his time in Jerusalem, he's having these massive debates with the Pharisees, he's continuing to teach, and then what we celebrate weekly here at some of our campuses, we celebrate communion, and that is just a picture of the Lord's Supper, something we do every week here. And so I would like for us as listeners, let's start there. So you have Jesus and the disciples at the Lord's table. Like, what's happening in these moments?
Yeah, there's believe it or not, there's a lot of complexity to this. There's a lot of books that have been written, and you will find people that will debate various things about the days and so forth. But what we're going to talk about is the most traditional way, and I think probably the best way to understand the events of that week as you string the four Gospels together. And the Gospel writers, this is important to remember, you have four biographies of Jesus that are written by or commissioned by directly with the apostles. Like Luke was, you think, working very closely with Paul, so he wasn't one of the 12 apostles, but Matthew was, John was, and Mark, of course, is thought to be working very closely with Peter. So you have these. Now you have other writings that came later that are, sometimes more than a century after, but these are our four authoritative Gospels, and here's what you will read when you read them. They all differ a little bit sometimes on secondary details. That's not a contradiction. It's the primary details on which they are the same, and that's how you know it's an authentic account. Any police officer will tell you if you get multiple eyewitnesses who viewed the same incident, they will differ on secondary details, not because they're contradicting one another, although people can, and sometimes they see things differently. But even if they're giving an accurate representation, one may watch a person run across the street, and the other person didn't see that at all. They were looking at the car, So one has one story and the other doesn't. It doesn't mean there wasn't a person that didn't run across the street that caused the wreck. It just means one person saw it and the other person didn't write about that. You have secondary details that differ, but they don't contradict. They just add layers of detail. The primary details are all the same. So you talk about, for instance, Passover. We have in every gospel that incident. Now, John describes it with the foot washing episode, but you still have that moment where Jesus gathers to prepare for the Passover. And the most traditional approach, and again, this is also very complicated. You'll have different ideas. But that is that Friday is the actual Passover day in that week. Now, last week it was Sunday, Saturday or Sunday. It was over the weekend. Yeah. It's when the full moon, it's the first full moon after the spring equinox. So first full moon after spring is Passover. The next Sunday is Easter, at least in our tradition. So we got very close to last Sunday being the Easter, but you had Passover. But that year, Passover would have fallen on Friday. And that makes sense in the providence and sovereignty of God. So Thursday is, as sun goes down, they're celebrating a Passover meal with his disciples, a traditional Jewish meal. So what happens? That night, they're taking the supper together, the bread, the wine. Jesus infuses those symbols with meaning and is clearly understanding what is to come. Judas leaves. It's unclear if the disciples really understood even what was going on there, but Jesus did, Judas did, and he leaves. They leave from there and go to the place of prayer. Jesus now knows it's imminent, and he goes to spend some time in prayer. Now it's late in the evening, and they've had a big meal. By the way, delicious. Like what do you do after you take Thanksgiving meal?
I take a nap. I take
right,
a strong
that's
nap.
right. And I'm telling you that only because everybody does.
Right.
We all are tired.
I do that at lunch on Mondays.
Okay, well, especially that day. We put the Detroit Lions on football, and then we go to take a nap. So they had just eaten a large meal. It's now late at night. And they go just over from where they would have met across the Kidron Valley. It's a very walkable distance up to the Mount of Olives and what we know as the Garden of Gethsemane, or the Garden of the Wine, or the Olive Press. That's what that word means. And it's still there today. There are olive trees, and of course there's a church, and you see trees that are centuries old. I don't know that they are 2,000 years old, but they are centuries old and may have been the offspring of, trees that were there. But there is an olive grove, natural historic olive grove there on the Mount of Olives, hence its name. And it overlooks Jerusalem. It's very beautiful. But so they're there at night and they're praying. That's what's going on. And probably the arrest begins to take place sometime after midnight. At or around midnight is when the soldiers come to arrest Jesus.
And so you have this scene. I mean, obviously, the disciples, they're exhausted. Jesus, as you read through Scripture, I mean, he is not just praying, he is praying in anguish. One of the gospel accounts says that he was even sweating blood.
Luke 22, at least that one, drops of blood falling to the ground. And we've said that's a medical condition. I'm not sure I can say it, but medical condition, where literally in a stressful situation, you can have blood secreting through the sweat glands.
And then in God's gospel, I think it's in John 18, you see, okay, now there's this company of soldiers coming towards Jesus. And we, a lot of, if you grew up in the church, you know the story, Peter takes out a sword, he cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. You have, just kind of chaos ensues. But then Jesus kind of peacefully goes almost.
Right. So Jesus is arrested. Again, the gospel writers don't write like Western writers. We would have liked it 1:23 a.m., or something. But I picture it after midnight, somewhere around 1 a.m., something like that, Jesus is arrested. This is a group of soldiers that were under the command of the Jewish high priest. Again, we have to understand something about the political dynamic in Jerusalem. The Romans are the rulers. So yes, there's actually even a Jewish king who works for the Romans, Herod. He's from up north. You have Pilate, who's the governor. So there's just varying degrees here of a kind of overlapping civil authority. But Pilate would have been the governor there, reporting directly to Rome. And but the Jewish leaders, the high priest, they are governing daily life within Jerusalem. These are Jewish people. The Romans want to keep order, collect taxes, and keep everybody from, killing their soldiers. But the high priest have a measure of authority. And they apparently had soldiers that worked for them. They may have been Roman soldiers, but they were under their command. And so at the high priest's command, they had already struck a deal with Judas. They go out into the night. I think we talked about that. Why? Because they wanted to arrest him away from the crowds in a private place. So they get him at midnight where Judas knew he would be. And they go. It's now midnight, 1 a.m. He's arrested. Again, Peter imagines a scuffle, but Jesus quickly reproves him. He heals the soldier's ear, as you recall. And then they're arrested, and he is taken to the high priest.
Which is interesting. So now we're at this point where you can read through the different gospel accounts. You can see, there's a few trials that, you might lose yourself in. And so what I want to do today is what you've kind of established, what we talked about a little bit, is there's actually 2 trials. It's not a bunch, but there's 2. So help me understand that. Yeah.
And actually I was looking at a book, 7 Trials of Jesus, But you could break them down. So it gets confusing to people. It gets confusing. But break it down this way. There is a religious trial and there is a civil trial. There is a trial in front of the Jewish leaders. Now, there's a couple of, like a ping pong ball there. And that's why you get to 7 trials. Right. But mainly, they're the religious trials, they're the civil trials. And what happens before dawn during that, what we would call early Friday morning, is the religious trial. He is brought to the house of Caiaphas. This would have been a complex. It's not just his, he's got a little house. No, it's a complex. It's a place where the Jewish leaders would have gathered to meet. We think of like a governor's mansion or a White House. In other words, when you're a person of that much importance, you're overseeing a group of leaders. there's meeting space. This is like a headquarters, so to speak. So, and there is a place today that is built on top of where there's a church there where you can go to the house of Caiaphas, and it's a very moving part there in Jerusalem. You see ancient steps that do date back to the time of Jesus, and imagine that he walked up and down those steps, and you go down into a dungeon-like area below this church, which was there during the time of Christ. And you can imagine, we don't know if it was that place, but you can imagine Jesus being held there during the pre-dawn hours. He goes before the religious authorities. Now, there are two names that get mentioned here, and this is what gets confusing. Annas, who is mentioned in the book of John, but the more common name is Caiaphas. Caiaphas is the high priest during that time. So we read about Caiaphas. But Annas apparently was the father-in-law of the high priest. He had been a high priest. This is like a family deal. Think of like the Godfather, all right? Something like that. This is the family, okay, of the high priest. And Annas, according to John's gospel, actually interrogates Jesus first. Some have suggested, was he the power behind the throne? In other words, like an older leader, not officially the high priest, but he's the father-in-law, the older leader with a lot of influence, and he is certainly in a position of, well, great influence. So he actually interrogates Jesus, and then Jesus is brought to the acting high priest Caiaphas and appears in a trial there.
And what you've established, I've heard you say it before, is even during this religious trial, like obviously the Jews, they were able to govern themselves, but there were laws for them in governing themselves, and they actually broke a few of their own laws even in these trials. I don't know if you're able to speak into that.
Well, there are certainly religious laws,
right? And
and there may have been civic laws as well. But this is highly unusual. Obviously, look, obviously, when a person is being arrested away from the crowd and then before dawn, literally. So let's say he's arrested at 1 a.m. We're just putting a time on it. Between then and the rooster crowing, which is when we know he was being led away to Pilate. So between 1 and let's say 6, you have those religious trials going on where he appears before Annas and is interrogated. Then he's brought before the Caiaphas, but the acting Sanhedrin, and there's an interrogation. And then there may have been like they meet, they put him in a dungeon, then they bring him back out. Now, there are several clear Jewish rules and customs this violated. First, he was being tried without being charged with a crime. There was no specific crime that he was charged with. Secondly, it's at night, and it was private. Obviously, there's a reason for that. No defense is permitted. No one defends him. 4, witnesses have been bribed to falsify reports. And then 5th, he would be executed on the same day that he was charged and tried. So this is more like what you've seen in the movies or in the days when civil rights were violated, maybe, and you talk about a lynch mob or you talk about a mob being stirred up. You've seen those old West movies where a bunch of guys go out, grab a guy. It's not much of a trial. Like, they know that this guy's guilty. They get him. We're going to hang him from the high tree. Like, and everyone cheers if they get it right in the movie, like the mob. Oh, they got the bad guy. But of course, that's used to hurt good people also and innocent people. So all of that is going on at night. It's an illegal, it's an immoral trial. But the point was to get it wrapped up and done as soon as possible because the next day was going to be a big day. It's Passover week. It's the day before Sabbath. The temple was going to get crowded again. They wanted this done and over.
And they were doing, this is just me kind of, assuming, it seems like they were trying to speed up the religious, like their part of this religious trial of it, because in Luke 22 it says, when daylight came, the elders of the people, both of the chief priests and the scribes, they convened and they brought him to the Sanhedrin. Now, who were the Sanhedrin? For those
the Sanhedrin are the ruling Jewish leaders. These are like the Jewish elders, composed of Pharisees, Sadducees. These are the leaders of Judaism in the first century of Jerusalem. So they're actually convened pre-dawn. I mean, this is going on when you talk about before Caiaphas. I mean, the Sanhedrin. You can imagine now. Some of them knew a plot was up. Some of them knew what was going on. But probably not all of them were in on it. But they're rousted out of bed. They're immediately brought. It's an emergency meeting pre-dawn at Caiaphas's house to supposedly look at the evidence and render a verdict. But really, the verdict was predetermined. They wanted Jesus dead.
Well, even in that passage in Luke 22, they asked him a very simple question. They said, "Are you the Son of God?" And Jesus' response is, "You say that I am."
You say that I am.
Yeah, and that's when everything that's that's when kind of that religious trial ends. If I'm right.
Well, in Luke's gospel, and again, you just get a very summarized version in these gospels. But what you need to know is that pre-dawn, let's say midnight to 6 a.m., it's a religious trial before a quickly rounded up group of Jewish religious leaders. They condemn him. They want him put to death. And that takes you to the second phase of the trial.
And that's where you kind of you can pick back up in John's gospel in John 18, where it says, all right, they leave Caiaphas' house and they head to the headquarters. They head to go see Pilate.
Pilate was in town because of the Passover festival. It's a big deal. Pilate's in town. So is Herod Antipas. He's in town. And Pilate doesn't seem to know that at first, or he only thinks about that later. I don't know what he knew, but it's going to almost be like an afterthought that he's going to try to push this off on Herod. But they bring him to Pilate, and they bring him. You remember, according to the Gospels, they're leading him out. The rooster crows. Remember, Peter has denied him 3 times before dawn because they're outside the high priest's house, and you can stand. To this day, you stand out. Now it's, of course, not the actual house, but the site. And by the way, the church that's built there now, guess what's on top of the church? A rooster. They have a rooster. And to remind us of the rooster crowing. So it's there that Peter denies the Lord in the courtyard, outside. Again, it's like a public. It's like people gathering outside the White House. I'm not saying it was that big, but it would be like that. Like a big deal is going on, so everyone's gathered outside.
Yeah, but it's still like really early in the morning. And
no, they had a fire. It's before dawn.
Right, exactly.
It's overnight. This was an all-night deal.
Right.
And which, again, helps you understand that this was a trumped-up, rigged trial. It was at night.
Right.
I mean, and it was in a hurry. And they wanted a quick statement, and let's get done with it.
Right. But then you have, you don't know. I mean, obviously, I kind of speculate a little bit. But, you have the Sanhedrin. They bring him before Pilate. And then Pilate's like, what do you want me to do with this guy?
Yeah. So that leads us to the second trial, and that's the Roman trial. So they come out and they take him to Pilate's house. That's early. They might have had to get Pilate out of bed.
Right.
And what are they up to now? And he comes out. They bring him to Pilate. Pilate interrogates him, but there really is, Pilate says, "I find no fault in this man." Like, there's what are you doing? This doesn't concern me. And then he, in at least one of the Gospels, he says, Herod is in town. Well, Herod's from Galilee. Maybe Herod will look at him. Well, Herod, there's a brief time in which he's brought before Herod, but Herod is not about to be drawn into this. And so Pilate is now forced to make a decision. So you have a series, some would say 3 trials. Pilate, Herod, and then Pilate again. But it's all part of this civil trial before Roman authorities.
Well, and it's interesting because when I was in student ministry, we did a fun series just through these trials, and one of my favorite moments in that first time Jesus and Pilate are conversing with each other, it kind of just ends abruptly, where Pilate just says, "What is truth?" And then conversation seems to stop, and then you see Jesus before Herod, and that's where you see, Jesus, he's put in this bright colored robe, he's mocked. I mean, Herod just does what Herod does. He's just an evil person, and sends him back to Pilate. But my question is, why didn't Pilate just let him go? Like at the beginning?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we of course, in the providence of God, this was ordained. But why didn't Pilate just let him go? Obviously, he bowed to political pressure. Even in the end, he authorized the sentence, but washed his hands as if to say, "I wash my hands of this man." In other words, I'm going to let you do what you want to do, but I'm not guilty of this man's blood. But, of course, he was, because they couldn't have done what they wanted to do unless Pilate authorized it. So you're dealing with political pressure. And I think to understand it, you have to try to crawl into the skin of Pilate and into the moment of tension in Jerusalem and just how hard it was for the Romans. shoot, how hard it is for anybody, even today, to keep Jerusalem at peace.
Yeah.
I mean, so the Romans had as hard a time as anybody. And Pilate is, I mean, the one thing he doesn't want, the one thing that's going to look bad on his resume is if the Jews get out of control in Jerusalem. So you're playing a kind of cat and mouse game. He wants the religious leaders to be able to get done what they want because through them, the Jewish people will behave themselves. He doesn't want the religious leaders who had a lot of influence and power turning on him. Now, could he have defeated them? Of course. He had the army. But, no one wanted to send a report back to Rome that Pilate had to send an army in and kill 1,000 Jews. Right. I mean, they had moments like that. It doesn't look good. They don't want it. It creates problems. So what Pilate is simply trying to do is navigate a tricky political situation. And his primary motive is, how do I keep things from going off the rails? Right. And he has no affinity for Jesus. I mean, this is just one guy. And at some point, I think he just reasoned, I know this isn't right. This man hasn't deserved death. But this is going to keep these people happy. If I give them what they want, then they will shut up and go home, more or less. The religious leaders will say thank you, and they will go. And, Rome is not going to care about one guy being killed. And so it's one of those deals where, look, give them what they want. I don't really like it, but I don't like these people anyway, and they don't like me, So give them what they want, and the desired end will be, I keep peace in Jerusalem. The religious leaders are happy. They keep the people in line, and there's no bad report cards on me to Rome.
Right. And that's what's I love just the study of Pilate, just a very interesting one to me, because Jesus comes back from Herod. Obviously, he's beaten now. He's dressed as this king in purple or bright colored clothes, I think as Luke's gospel says. But then he comes back to Pilate, and Pilate's like, oh, okay, so he has him flogged at that moment. Yeah. He puts a crown of thorns on his head, and then you have the whole thing with Barabbas.
The whole thing with Barabbas, who is a seditious criminal. And that's a confusing one, because it almost looks like Pilate thought, I'll give them this guy who's a bad guy, but they like him maybe because he probably had done something against Rome. Yeah. Oh, that's probably why he's there. Okay. Yeah. So he'd probably done something against Rome. So he's like, he's a violent guy and a bad guy, but maybe a little bit like a folk hero or something, So I'm going to appease them. Surely they'll be okay with Barabbas. Yeah. This man or Barabbas, kind of, and they cry for Barabbas. I think it almost fools him, maybe. Maybe he thought they would want him. Maybe he thought they didn't want Barabbas. But they're like, maybe I'd walk that theory back, because I think he must have played that they wouldn't want Barabbas, and they surprised him when they said, give us Barabbas. So even a guy that's violent, even a guy, again, maybe he was a folk hero of some, but the Jewish high priests don't want guys like that running around, right? They want to keep order. So he must have thought that those Jewish leaders would go, well, we don't want Barabbas out here. That guy just caused us trouble. But no, they were willing to take Barabbas and crucify Jesus. So it was almost like Pilate ran a bluff on them, and they called his bluff. It's the way I have read it sometimes.
That's good. Well, this is kind of an application question, I guess you would say, because you see this almost compromise going on within Pilate. He's trying to figure out a way out of this almost. So he, washes his hands. He sends him to Herod, puts Barabbas in front of everybody, but the crowd demands crucifixion for Jesus. And so I would ask, do you see a way, or how does this reveal kind of man's injustice, but also God's sovereignty, his sovereign plan, all in one thing? Yeah.
Well, it does both. Again, one of the great theological quandaries are tensions or challenges as to understand the sovereignty of God, who knows the end from the beginning, and the nature and responsibility of man. And that, of course, is more than a single podcast or a single book. It is a centuries-long controversy and debate, because those are things that are both true. The Bible makes it clear that God had planned this from the beginning. And yet, what you see are men acting of their own volition to do that which is evil. Right. And so God had planned it from the beginning, but yes, they chose willfully and enthusiastically to put Jesus to death. And again, for different motives. For Pilate, it was, who cares? Let's keep the peace. For the Jewish leaders, it was, he's a threat to our system. The truth was hitting too close to home, and they wanted him put to death. And for some of them, it may have been, hey, they just thought he was going to unsettle things, and you don't want things unsettled because that threatens your deal, which they had it pretty good. I mean, they lived pretty good. They ran a pretty lucrative religious system. So you have all these people for whom Jesus was just a threat. And of course, beyond that, you have the forces of evil who know who he is, and this was the moment to put God's son to death. So you've got all that, boiling in this stew. But what you see in human injustice is Pilate, the religious leaders, even the crowd, different motives, but in the end, an evil result.
And then you have the march towards Golgotha.
Mm-hmm.
And have you walked that road?
Yeah, you walk what is known as the Via Dolorosa. It's more of a Catholic thing, maybe an Orthodox thing too, the Stations of the Cross and so forth, which come out of Catholic tradition more than even the Gospels. But you can walk that road that is traditionally marked out as the Via Dolorosa. And it's, you can see whenever we go to Jerusalem, and we're hoping to go back in 27, whenever you go down, you go below. There's a monastery there, and a convent is what it is. And you go down below the surface of the street, and you can go down to the stones that would have been the street in the first century. And there are markings there, even markings for games. You can see where they've almost like carved like we would think of a tic-tac-toe, but they have a little dice game. And of course, you don't know who is gambling, but I mean, of course, it's just a very moving thing because soldiers did gamble for his robes and so forth. But you can see where they've carved into those stones. You can walk on those ancient stones. It's very moving. You're below the current street because obviously the city has been built up over itself. But you go down a couple of stories really below the street, and you can walk that road. Again, there's debate about where is the actual hill that in Latin is known as Calvary, Golgotha, the place of the skull. There are two sites that are there. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the more traditional site, and that is the church that's built inside Jerusalem. Over what the Orthodox believe and Catholics believe that this is the Golgotha. And literally, you really can't tell. I mean, you can go in the church and see some rock outcroppings and so forth, but the church has been built what would be over that area. So what you see is a large church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It'd be very busy. As we speak today, there are crowds thronging in and out of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And different religious traditions, by the way, sharing that space is very funny. They don't always get along with one another, and there's some fascinating things about that. But it's a very historic church. In our tradition, and when I take people, we love to go to what's known as Gordon's Tomb, which is outside the city walls. Now, most people believe the Church of the Holy Sepulchre would have been outside the city walls in the time of Jesus, because we know Calvary would have been outside the city walls. But today it's inside the city walls. But Gordon's tomb is outside the city walls, and it was, I don't know, I want to say the 1800s. I haven't looked at the date in a while, but this was discovered by an English archaeologist and writer, and hence it's known as Gordon's tomb. But what he discovered was a hill that looks very much like a skull, and it really does. Now, it's deteriorated some over the years, but especially when you look at pictures from the early part of the 20th century, it's a skull. Like, I'd show you the picture, you go, well, that's a skull. And then next to it, he found the ancient remnants of a garden because there was a cistern. It was clear there was a garden. And then there is an empty tomb dating from the first century. So it was, believed, and some still would believe, that it was the tomb of Jesus. It's an empty tomb. And it had Christian markings on it dating from early centuries. Now, I could tell you that most archaeologists don't believe that's the actual tomb. The reality is we don't know, but we love to take groups there because it feels more authentic. You sit in a garden next to a hill that looks like a cross, and there is an empty tomb. So do I know that was the tomb Jesus was in? No, but it's an empty tomb in a garden next to a hill that looks like a skull outside the walls of Jerusalem. So I don't know. It doesn't really matter as much to me. What matters is that it happened and that the tomb is empty. So in heaven, we know. I don't know. I guess maybe it's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But if you walk in, it just looks like a vast Orthodox church. And some people like that, and other people are a little put off by all the almost over-the-top symbolism in the crowds. You go to Gordon's tomb, and you sit in the garden, you have the Lord's Supper together, and it's quiet. You hear the birds chirping, and you have your moment when you walk into that ancient tomb, and it does date from the time of Jesus. And you walk into that tomb, and you see, well, it's empty. And it's a tomb just like, we read about where a stone would have been rolled in front of it. So we don't know the exact spot, but we do know the tomb is empty, don't we?
That's right.
So that navigating what happened here as we think about Good Friday and the next time our church family will gather, I know we have Wednesday night activities for those who are hearing this that fast, but Friday, if you hear this before Good Friday, I hope you'll join us. But thinking about what happened over those hours, it weighs upon me here. I think about what happened on Wednesday. Judas agreed to betray him. Jesus was anointed in Bethany. And then, Thursday, the Lord's Supper. And Thursday night, into the Garden of Gethsemane, the betrayal around midnight, the arrest. And when we wake up Friday morning, it'll probably be the first thing that comes to my mind. Our Lord was already... By the time I wake up, even though I tend to wake up early, our Lord was already beaten, apprehended, and was probably undergoing one of those trials and preparing to be crucified. And sometime mid to late morning, he would have been crucified.
That's the beauty of these past 2 weeks doing this podcast is I think it definitely helped me refocus as we approach Good Friday. And that was actually going to be my last question is how do we as a church, how do we as just believers in Christ focus our attention on what happened on Good Friday? You've already answered that.
Yeah, and I just to say, and I think we said this even last week, we're Easter people.
Right.
We worship on Sunday. It's the Lord's Day. And when we gather for worship, there should be joy. There should be joy. Any Sunday around here, and I know at the Seminole campus, Clearwater, any of our campus, anytime we sing a song about the resurrection, somebody goes into it, everybody's hooping and hollering. And they should.
Yep.
We're Easter people. We're resurrection people. But this is the week we need to get to it slow.
Yeah.
Let it get to it slow. Because the cross we're people of the cross. And the victory of Easter is only understood in its totality when you understand the meaning of the cross. And the meaning of the cross is only understood in its totality when you understand the victory of the resurrection. Those things go together. And we need to walk slowly. So if it's Wednesday or Thursday or Friday, walk slowly in your mind and in your heart. Grieve. And I mean that. Think about the cross. And remember that Jesus went there for you. He went there for you. He suffered for you. He sacrificed for you. Think about the price he paid. Think about the pain he endured. Think about the suffering. Think about what happened. And realize he did that for me. He did that for my sins. God sent his own son to die on the cross for me. And I hope even Saturday, though I know people will be excited about the weekend, they're baking cakes and, hiding eggs and all that kind of stuff. And that's fine. That's good. But I hope on Saturday you'll think even what it must have been like that Saturday, a dark Saturday, a Saturday where they wondered if the world had just crashed in on them, if they wondered if there was any future, any hope, even though the Lord had told them they were despondent. And as we let that just rest upon our heart, when we come to worship on the week, and then on Sunday we have one Saturday night too. But when we come to worship, then our hearts will be ready to rejoice in the goodness of the story of the resurrection.
Well, I would even challenge those listening right now. Maybe you have a hard time slowing down. I know we live in a busy world. Maybe you have a hard time slowing down and really focusing on this. I would challenge you, man, take a long lunch on Friday and come to that
Boy, if
Good
you
Friday
can.
service. We had a great meeting yesterday, just kind of talking.
It's going to be beautiful.
It's gonna be a very special time.
We try to stick right at an hour.
Yep.
We really do. We watch that. We know some people need to go back to work,
Mm-hmm.
but we need the whole hour. We're going to take it. It's going to be meaningful. It's going to be beautiful. We're going to take communion together. The music's going to be very sober, reflective, meaningful. A combination of hymns, but also great songs today. But they focus on the cross. It's not going to be focusing on the resurrection. We're going to be focusing on the cross. We take communion. We think about the death of our Lord, the last words he spoke, and then we leave. It's kind of quiet when you leave, kind of somber. We want that. Not happy clappy. There's a time for that, but not then. No, we go out quietly, let it rest upon you, and if you can take the time off of work, believe me, it's worth doing. And some of you are all for it. Please come. You want to. You just, to me, the Good Friday service is what gets you ready for Easter.
Yeah, I think.
I don't know that my heart would be ready for Easter if it didn't walk through that Good Friday.
No, that's a great word, Pastor. And so that's here at our Clearwater campus at noon this Friday. I would just highly, highly encourage.
Yeah, all of our campuses, whether you're at Seminole, where your folks are, or Crystal Beach, or Safety Harbor, of course, that's right around the corner, East Lake, all of our campuses. I believe our Espanol campus will even join us.
Yep.
So we're just having a beautiful service together here at the Clearwater campus. It'll be a good crowd and a full room, but a very, very meaningful atmosphere, and we would love to see many people there.
And then obviously Sunday, just pick a time, and we're at a campus.
Yeah, throw a dart at the calendar.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure you'll post it. We have it on our website. Every campus has kind of a different schedule, so no sense running through them all. Some have 2, 3 services, 4 here at Clearwater, others 2 or 3, and I think multiple services at every campus, including some early. Pick a service and come. We say to the folks here at Clearwater, come on Saturday night at 6 if you can, or Sunday morning at 8.
Yep.
We got a lot of room there. That's where we're going to have more seats. We have great crowds there, but we'll have more seats there. And but at the 9:30 and 11, which are at Clearwater, and I know everybody's a little different, boy, it'll be packed. And so if you come in with 12 people needing to sit, together.
Go by twos.
Yeah, it'll be a little bit challenging.
Right.
Come early if you can to do that. And but it'll be a full crowd, and it'll be a great, great day, and most of all, great day because Jesus is alive.
It's going to be great. Well, we appreciate y'all listening. Pastor, I appreciate you just walking us these past 2 weeks through Holy Week. It's been just eye-opening for me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. So look forward to Friday, look forward to Sunday, and just look forward to just watching people's lives just change. It's one of my favorite things on Easter Sunday, just watching light bulbs go off in people's heads.
We pray that happens.
Absolutely. So know that you're being prayed for often. We love you guys, and we will talk to you here on the podcast next week. You have a great, great week.